In a shocking encounter, an elderly black woman finds herself handcuffed and blackmailed by a police officer, all because of her race. The officer's harsh treatment takes a chilling turn when he suddenly realizes who she really is. This unexpected twist forces him to confront a deeper truth about his own actions. Why would a police officer target someone so vulnerable? And what happens when he learns her identity? This story isn't just about a moment of injustice, it's about power, prejudice, and the surprising moments that change everything. As the officer kneels in front of her, the tension in the air is thick, leaving us to wonder what led to this intense moment, and how will the woman respond? Stay tuned as we dive into this shocking encounter and explore the truth behind the badge, the system, and the lives they impact. The elderly woman, who had been living a quiet life in her community, had never expected to be caught in such a dangerous situation. Her name was Ms. Hazel, a retired teacher known for her kindness and wisdom. She'd spent her days volunteering, helping younger generations, and speaking out against inequality in her own gentle way. But that afternoon, as she walked through the park, a routine outing turned into a nightmare. The officer had stopped her, accusing her of something she hadn't done. His words were harsh, the way he grabbed her arm uncomfortably tight. For a moment, she thought she might be dreaming, but the cold metal of the handcuffs told her otherwise. What was even more unsettling was his tone. He seemed to have a personal vendetta, something deeper, more troubling than just a simple misunderstanding. And then, just as the situation reached its peak, the officer's face changed completely when he heard her name. The officer stood frozen for a moment, staring at Miss Hazel as if the very sight of her had shaken him to his core. He quickly stepped back, confusion and panic flashing across his face. His hand, still gripping the cuffs, trembled slightly. It wasn't just the name, it was asterisk her asterisk. In that moment, he recognized the woman in front of him. Miss Hazel wasn't just another elderly woman walking in the park. She was the daughter of a respected civil rights leader, someone he had learned about in school, but had never imagined meeting. Her father's activism had changed the course of history, and he had been taught to admire his bravery. But the officer's discomfort wasn't just about her identity. His mind raced back to a time when his family had been involved in darker moments, moments of prejudice, moments that had stained their legacy. Could this woman, this living symbol of change, know about his own past? Miss Hazel stood there in silence, her eyes unwavering, like a rock against the crashing waves. Her entire life had been shaped by moments like this, moments where people in power tried to break her down, tried to erase her truth. She had seen it all, the unfairness, the prejudice, the hatred. But she had also seen the change that came when people confronted their own demons. And now, here she was, staring down a man who was clearly struggling to reconcile his duty with his conscience. She wasn't afraid. She had been through far worse. The officer, still holding the handcuffs, took a step back, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. His voice finally broke the silence, but it was barely a whisper. You don't know what this is. It's not what it looks like." His words sounded weak, even to his own ears, and Miss Hazel could hear the crack in his voice. She knew what he was trying to do, trying to backpedal, to justify the unjustifiable, but she wasn't having it. "I know exactly what this is," she replied, her voice steady, but every word was laced with the years of pain and struggle she had endured. "You don't get to pretend anymore. Not today, not here." The air between them seemed to thicken, each word hanging in the space like an electric charge ready to ignite. The officer's gaze flickered toward the growing crowd, the weight of their eyes pressing down on him. Was he really going to arrest this woman? Was he willing to be the face of this injustice, knowing the kind of power she held? And then, as if the world had decided to stop and listen, a sharp sound pierced the air, a car door slamming shut. The officer's head snapped to the side, his heart skipping a beat. Someone else had arrived, and this wasn't just anyone. It was a man in a suit, walking toward them with purpose, his expression unreadable. Miss Hazel's eyes flickered toward the newcomer, and a small, knowing smile tugged at the corner of her lips. She had been waiting for this moment. The officer's body tensed, and his face paled. He knew who this man was, even without the name tag or badge. It was a figure from his past, someone with a kind of power that made him question everything he thought he knew about right and wrong. The air felt charged, the tension unbearable. Would the arrival of this man force the officer to make a choice? Or would it escalate the situation beyond control? The clock seemed to slow, and for a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The officer's eyes flickered from Miss Hazel to the man in the suit. The answer to the question that had been building all along was about to be revealed, but which way would it go? As the man in the suit approached, the tension in the air thickened, the crowd now completely silent, waiting for something to break. The officer stood frozen, caught between his duty, his fear, and this unsettling realization that everything he thought he knew was crumbling. The newcomer's footsteps echoed on the pavement, each one hammering down the gravity of the situation. Miss Hazel's gaze remained steady on the officer, but her lips curled into a subtle, almost imperceptible smile. The suited man stopped just a few feet away, his presence commanding immediate attention. His suit was crisp, his face sharp, but there was something else, an intensity that wasn't just about power. He didn't speak at first, instead locking eyes with the officer. The silence felt suffocating, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Then, in one swift motion, the man removed a small, sleek phone from his pocket and handed it over to the officer. "Look at this," he said quietly, his voice calm, but carrying an unspoken warning. The officer took the phone hesitantly, his fingers trembling as he unlocked it. On the screen was a video, footage of the very incident that had just occurred. It wasn't just any video. It was a recording from the body camera of another officer, one who had been positioned at a distance, watching everything unfold. The footage clearly showed the officer's interactions with Miss Hazel, from the moment he stopped her to the harshness with which he grabbed her. The officer had been caught in the act. But there was more. As the officer's eyes scanned the video, a chilling realization dawned on him. The footage was time-stamped, moments before the supposed incident even happened. It was as though someone had known exactly what would take place, anticipating every move. The officer's heart raced as he looked back at the man in the suit, his stomach twisting in knots. "How did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. Miss Hazel's smile faded, replaced by a look of quiet resolve. "You think you're in control here, don't you?" she said softly. "But there are people who've been watching. People who know how to expose the truth, no matter how well you hide it." The suited man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on the officer's shoulder, the weight of his touch heavier than the officer could bear. "You're not the only one with secrets," he said, his voice low, almost threatening. "But you've just made a choice. A choice that's going to have consequences you can't even imagine." The officer was dizzy with confusion. The woman he had handcuffed wasn't just any elderly woman. She was someone deeply connected to a web of power, someone who could dismantle everything he had worked for. The footage, how had it been recorded in advance? What did these people know about him? Suddenly, a police siren blared in the distance, growing louder. The officer's pulse quickened. Reinforcements. Or had the moment passed, and now the entire system was about to collapse on him? Miss Hazel took a slow step forward, her voice cutting through the mounting tension. "You'll have to answer for this, whether you want to or not. The world's been watching. And now so have you." The officer's breath caught in his throat. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. He was caught between his badge, his conscience, and a future that seemed to be spiraling out of control. The line between right and wrong was blurring, and for the first time, he wasn't sure which side he was on. The siren's wail grew louder, sending a sharp jolt through the officer. His mind raced. How could things have escalated this far? His fingers clenched around the phone, the truth staring him in the face. The body cam footage, the timer stump, it was undeniable. He wasn't just caught in the act. Someone had orchestrated this entire encounter, had planned it down to the smallest detail. The man in the suit wasn't just some bystander, he was a player, and Ms. Hazel, this seemingly frail woman, was at the heart of it. The suited man's grip on the officer's shoulder tightened, as if he could feel the officer's panic. "You're in deep, aren't you?" he said, almost sympathetically. "This isn't just about you anymore. It's bigger than that. This is about a system that's rotting from the inside out." The officer's breath hitched. "Who are you?" he whispered, desperate to understand the full scope of the situation. Ms. Hazel stepped closer, her eyes unflinching. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's not just about you or me. It's about the system that keeps people like us down, keeps everyone down. And it's about time we expose it for what it is." The siren grew deafening, but the officer could barely hear it now. His world was spinning. He could feel the weight of the crowd's gaze, the camera lenses trained on him, waiting for him to make his move. His hand hovered near his gun. He knew that if he made any wrong move now, it could all fall apart. It was like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, and one step could send him tumbling into an abyss. The suited man leaned in, speaking softly, but with an edge that cut through the noise. "We have everything. Your past, your family, your every misstep. All of it's on file." His voice dropped lower. "And now it's your choice. You can stand here, pretend to be the hero, or you can stand with her. With asterisk us asterisk, but make no mistake, there's no going back after this." The officer's heart pounded, and for the first time, he felt the weight of the badge around his neck like an anchor pulling him into darkness. He glanced over at Miss Hazel, standing with quiet dignity, and something inside him broke. He could see it now, the years of struggle, the sacrifices, the injustice she had witnessed and fought against. And all this time, he had been part of that system, upholding it, enforcing it without question. But he couldn't keep pretending anymore. He couldn't look away. The officer slowly lowered his gaze to the cuffs still dangling in his hands. "Get them off her," the suited man said, his voice commanding. The officer hesitated. For a moment he stood there, trapped in his own thoughts, his own guilt. But then he did it. Slowly, deliberately, he unclipped the handcuffs and let them fall to the ground with a soft metallic clink. Miss Hazel stepped back, her hands free at last. She met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but there was no malice in her eyes. Only a quiet strength. The suited man nodded once, his face expressionless. "That's one part of the story," he said, "but we're not done yet." Before the officer could respond, a new voice rang out from behind him. A sharp, authoritative voice that sent a chill down his spine. "Hold it right there." The officer turned, his stomach dropping as he saw a group of uniformed officers approaching, led by his own sergeant. They were storming toward the scene, eyes fixed on him. But it wasn't just any sergeant, it was someone the officer knew all too well. The sergeant's eyes widened as they locked onto the officer. He looked between the suited man, Miss Hazel, and the officer in disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice rising. Before the officer could answer, the suited man spoke, his tone deadly calm. "It's exactly what it looks like. And you know it." The sergeant took a step back, his face pale. The suited man wasn't just threatening the officer anymore. He was threatening the entire department, the whole system that held everything together. It was as if he knew something that could bring it all crashing down. The sergeant hesitated, his gaze shifting between the officer and the man in the suit. A moment of realization flickered in his eyes, and just as quickly, he reached for his radio. But before he could speak, Miss Hazel moved forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's time we all face the truth," she said, her words echoing in the charged air. "The system is broken, and it's not just one officer, it's the whole thing." The officer stood there, his mind spinning, but one thing was clear. The power had shifted. He wasn't just facing the consequences of his actions, he was standing at the edge of a revolution. The twists, the secrets, and the lies were coming to light, and nothing would ever be the same again. Then, in the chaos, the suited man offered one final chilling statement before disappearing into the crowd. "This is just the beginning," he said. "You'll see." As the suited man disappeared into the crowd, the officers stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The tension in the air was thick, but there was an undeniable shift. The officer who had been caught in the act stood there, a broken man, his badge no longer a symbol of power, but his own guilt. Miss Hazel, once handcuffed and vulnerable, now walked away with her head held high, her message clear. Justice wasn't just about laws, it was about truth. The sergeant, realizing the weight of what had just transpired, turned to his officers, silently acknowledging the cracks in their system. No words were needed. The silence spoke louder than any reprimand. Miss Hazel's quiet resilience and the officer's moral reckoning sparked something larger, a movement of awareness that would spread far beyond that park. The fight for change had just begun, and it wasn't over yet. But now, at least, the first stone had been thrown.